Sarah smoothed down her black apron with steady hands, preparing herself for another evening in the opulent dining room of the Gilded Lily, an exclusive fine dining restaurant perched in the heart of the city. The polished marble floors gleamed under the soft glow of ornate chandeliers, and the subtle hum of refined conversation intermingled with the gentle clinking of silverware and crystal glasses. Every detail, from the floral arrangements to the immaculate table settings, was designed to exude luxury. This was Sarah's workplace, a world of elegance where the wealthy came to celebrate their successes, flaunt their status, or indulge in extravagance. But for Sarah, it was also a place of stark contrast, a world far removed from her true passion. When she wasn't serving the city's elite, Sarah devoted herself to her role as a volunteer with the Red Cross, bringing relief and hope to people whose lives had been upended by tragedy. As she prepared for the evening rush, Sarah allowed herself a moment of reflection. She thought about the family she had assisted just last week after their home was destroyed by a fire. The gratitude in their tear-filled eyes had stayed with her, a reminder of why she devoted so much of her time to helping others. That memory gave her the strength she needed to face the demanding guests who would soon fill the restaurant. "Table 12 needs fresh water," a fellow server whispered as they passed her. With a polite nod, Sarah grabbed a pitcher and glided across the dining room, her movements graceful and precise. She paused briefly to refill glasses, answering a guest's inquiry about the wine list with her characteristic patience. The restaurant was buzzing with energy as more patrons arrived, their laughter and animated discussions filling the air. As she worked, Sarah's gaze was briefly drawn to a woman seated at one of the tables, her neck adorned with a dazzling diamond necklace that caught the light with every movement. The stones sparkled so brightly they seemed to challenge the restaurant's chandeliers for brilliance. Sarah couldn't help but wonder how many disaster relief kits could be purchased with the cost of that single necklace. Shaking the thought away, she reminded herself to focus on the task at hand. Sarah adjusted the centerpiece on table 7, ensuring the fresh-cut flowers were arranged to perfection. Around her, the conversations of the wealthy drifted through the air, discussions about rising stock prices, upcoming galas, and exclusive business deals. To Sarah, these topics felt as foreign as they were detached from the struggles she witnessed in her volunteer work. Yet she treated each guest with the same unwavering courtesy, her professionalism shining through every interaction. The head waiter, Mr. Leland, approached her with his usual composed demeanor. His sharp suit and impeccable posture made him a commanding presence on the restaurant floor. He carried an air of authority but spoke with the calm precision of a conductor orchestrating a symphony. "Sarah," he said quietly, drawing her aside, "we have a VIP party arriving shortly. Table 14. I'd like you to handle it personally." Sarah met his gaze with a steady nod. "Of course, Mr. Leland," she replied, her voice even. She didn't need to ask why she had been chosen. Her ability to manage even the most demanding guests had earned her a reputation as the restaurant's most reliable server, but she also knew that VIPs often came with a side of arrogance, entitlement, and impossible expectations. "Thank you," Leland said, his tone lighter now. "I trust you'll handle them perfectly." As Sarah prepared the table, carefully arranging the fine china and ensuring every detail was flawless, she couldn't help but wonder who the VIPs might be. She didn't have to wait long for her answer. The ornate double doors of the restaurant swung open with a flourish, revealing a group of women dressed in couture outfits that seemed designed to outshine one another. At the center of the group was Veronica Hastings, a woman whose name was synonymous with wealth and influence. Veronica's glossy hair framed her perfectly symmetrical face, and her stride exuded the confidence of someone accustomed to having the world cater to her every whim. Veronica and her entourage were greeted immediately by Mr. Leland, who inclined his head slightly in deference. "Ms. Hastings, it's an honor to have you with us this evening. Your table is ready." Veronica barely acknowledged him with a flick of her manicured fingers. "I expect the best tonight as always," she said, her tone carrying a faint edge of warning. As the group was seated at the prime spot in the restaurant, a table by the floor-to-ceiling windows offering a breathtaking view of the city skyline, Sarah approached with her practiced smile firmly in place. "Good evening, ladies," she began, her voice warm and professional. "Welcome to the Gilded Lily. My name is Sarah, and I'll be taking care of you this evening." Veronica's eyes swept over Sarah, and the corners of her lips curved into a faint smirk. "How quaint," she remarked, her tone dripping with condescension. "Do they make all the staff wear those shoes? Or is that just your personal choice?" Sarah felt the heat rise in her cheeks but maintained her composure. "These are part of our uniform, ma'am," she replied evenly. "May I start you off with some sparkling water or perhaps our signature cocktails?" Another woman in the group, a blonde named Amanda, leaned forward, her expression feigning innocence. "Water?" she asked, her voice loud enough to draw attention from nearby tables. "Darling, do we look like we drink tap water? Bring us your finest champagne if you even know what that is." The table erupted into laughter, the sound sharp and piercing. Sarah nodded politely, jotting down the order in her notepad. As she turned to leave, she overheard Veronica whisper to the group, loud enough for Sarah to hear, "Can you believe they let someone like her serve us? Honestly, where do they find these people?" Sarah's grip on her notepad tightened as she walked away, but her steps remained steady. Years of working in high-pressure environments, both in the restaurant and as a volunteer, had taught her the value of composure. She reminded herself that she had faced far greater challenges than this. Returning with the champagne moments later, she poured it with practiced precision, careful not to let her hand tremble. Veronica watched her intently, a cruel smile playing on her lips. "I hope you're not expecting a big tip just for doing your job," Veronica said casually, taking a sip of her champagne. "Unlike you, we actually work for our money." Sarah felt the words sting, but she refused to let her expression falter. "My goal is to ensure you have an excellent dining experience," she said smoothly. "Now, may I tell you about our specials this evening?" As the night wore on, the women's behavior became increasingly unbearable. They nitpicked every detail, made outrageous demands, and laughed at Sarah's expense at every opportunity. When Sarah brought out their appetizers, Veronica sneered at her. "Tell me, Sarah," she said, her tone saccharine sweet. "What's it like to serve people who are clearly your betters? Does it make you regret not trying harder in school?" The table burst into laughter, the sound ringing in Sarah's ears like a cruel echo. But she stood tall, her voice unwavering as she placed the last dish on the table. "Your lobster bisque, ma'am," she said, her tone calm and professional. Veronica wrinkled her nose. "I hope you washed your hands before touching my food. God knows what kind of germs you might carry." As Sarah walked back to the kitchen, the laughter from Veronica's table echoed behind her, sharp and cutting. She focused on the rhythm of her steps and the hum of the bustling restaurant around her, letting those familiar sounds drown out the sting of their words. Once inside the kitchen, she leaned briefly against the cool stainless steel counter and took a deep breath, steadying herself. Maria, one of the line cooks, glanced over and immediately noticed Sarah's tight expression. She wiped her hands on her apron and walked over, her face a mix of concern and quiet strength. "Those women giving you a hard time?" Maria asked gently, her voice low to keep the conversation private. Sarah managed a faint smile. "It's nothing I can't handle." Maria frowned, clearly unconvinced. "Don't let them get to you, honey. You're worth 10 of them put together, and don't you forget it." For a moment, Sarah felt the tension in her chest ease. Maria's words were a balm against the weight of the evening. "You know," Maria continued, her tone warming, "I heard about what you did last week, spending your entire weekend at the shelter after the storm. Not many people would do that. You're the kind of person this world needs more of." Sarah blinked, surprised that anyone at work even knew about her volunteer efforts. "Thank you, Maria," she said softly, her voice thick with emotion. "That means a lot." Maria gave her a firm pat on the shoulder. "Now go out there and show them what real class looks like." With her spirits bolstered, Sarah smoothed down her apron and returned to the dining room, her steps steady and her head held high. As Sarah approached Veronica's table again, the group was still engaged in their boisterous conversation. Veronica glanced up, her eyes narrowing. "Well, well," she said, a smirk playing on her lips. "Look who's back. We thought you might have run off crying." Sarah didn't flinch. Instead, she smiled politely and said, "I apologize for any delay. Are you ready for your main courses, or would you like another drink first?" The women exchanged smug glances, clearly looking for another opportunity to make sport of her. As Sarah took their orders, they nitpicked every detail. One of the women complained that the menu descriptions were too vague, while another loudly criticized Sarah's handwriting as she jotted down their requests. "I hope you can actually read that," Veronica said with a mock-sweet smile. "I'd hate for you to mix up our orders just because the help can't write properly." Sarah felt a flicker of irritation, but she kept her tone even. "I assure you everything will be perfect." As the evening dragged on, the group's behavior only worsened. They snapped their fingers to summon her, loudly demanded more bread, and sent dishes back to the kitchen for imaginary flaws. At one point, one of Veronica's friends deliberately knocked over her glass of red wine, spilling it across the pristine white tablecloth. "Oh, clumsy me," the woman said with a smirk. "You'd better clean that up before it stains." Sarah bit her lip as she worked quickly to mop up the spill. The women's laughter rang in her ears, but she focused on the task, refusing to let her frustration show. As Sarah returned to the kitchen to retrieve their main courses, the tension in the dining room seemed to hang heavier than before. Other diners had begun to notice the group's behavior, their disapproving glances directed at Veronica's table. Sarah carried the dishes out carefully, balancing the weight of the tray with practiced ease. She placed the plates before each woman with her usual professionalism, her movements precise and unflinching. When she set Veronica's herb-crusted salmon down in front of her, Veronica's lips curled into a sneer. "Well," she said, poking at the dish with her fork, "I suppose even someone like you can manage to carry a plate without dropping it. It's probably the most you'll ever achieve." The table burst into laughter, but it was weaker now, some of the women shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Amanda, who had been among the loudest earlier, avoided Sarah's gaze entirely. "Is there anything else I can get for you ladies?" Sarah asked, her voice steady despite the sting of Veronica's words. "No," Veronica said with a dismissive wave. "Just try not to mess up the bill. I know math can be so hard for people like you." As Sarah turned to leave, the weight of the evening pressed against her like a heavy cloud. But she squared her shoulders, reminding herself of her worth. She knew that her value wasn't defined by the cruel words of a group of entitled women. The restaurant hummed with activity, but the energy at Veronica's table seemed different now. Though their laughter continued, it was thinner, more strained. The loud jabs and cruel remarks had lost some of their edge as the weight of their own behavior began to dawn on some of the women. Veronica, however, remained as smug as ever. She took a deliberate bite of her salmon, her gaze fixed on Sarah's retreating figure. As she swallowed, a strange look crossed her face, confusion then alarm. She reached for her water glass, but before she could take a sip, her hand flew to her throat. Her face turned an alarming shade of red as she began to choke. She gasped, her body jerking forward as her fingers clawed at her neck. "Veronica?" Amanda's voice cut through the table's chatter, tinged with panic. Are you okay?" Veronica couldn't respond. The sound of her gasping for air silenced the entire table. Jessica jumped to her feet, her chair screeching against the floor. "She's choking," she cried, her voice trembling. The commotion quickly drew the attention of the other diners. Heads turned, conversations halted, and an uneasy murmur spread across the room. Sarah, who had been clearing plates at a nearby table, heard the panic and turned swiftly. Her sharp eyes took in the scene in an instant. Veronica's face was now turning purple, her hands clutching at her throat as her chest heaved desperately. Without hesitation, Sarah sprang into action. "Stand back!" Sarah commanded, her voice steady but urgent. She reached Veronica's side in seconds, her presence cutting through the chaos like a lifeline. The women at the table scrambled to make room as Sarah positioned herself behind Veronica. She wrapped her arms around the woman's waist, one fist pressed just above her navel. With practiced precision, she delivered a series of upward thrusts. The entire restaurant held its breath, watching the scene unfold with rapt attention. For a moment, it seemed as though nothing was happening. Then, with a violent cough, Veronica expelled the piece of food that had been lodged in her throat. The relief was instantaneous. Veronica collapsed back into her chair, gasping for air as the color slowly returned to her face. Around her, her friends hovered nervously, their expressions a mix of shock and gratitude. "Breathe slowly," Sarah instructed, her voice calm but firm. She placed a steadying hand on Veronica's shoulder, her own breath measured despite the adrenaline coursing through her. Veronica nodded weakly, too shaken to speak. As the realization of what had just happened sank in, the restaurant erupted into applause. Diners clapped and cheered, their admiration for Sarah's quick thinking and bravery reverberating through the space. "You saved her life," a man at a nearby table said, his voice carrying over the applause. His words seemed to echo the sentiment of the entire room. The restaurant manager rushed over, his face pale but relieved. "Sarah," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "That was incredible. Are you all right, ma'am?" he asked Veronica, who was still catching her breath. Veronica nodded weakly, her eyes wide as they met Sarah's. For the first time that evening, the smug superiority that had marked her expression was gone. In its place was something closer to vulnerability and shame. I don't know what to say," Veronica stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. "You don't need to say anything," Sarah replied gently, stepping back to give her space. "I'm just glad you're okay." Veronica's friends exchanged uneasy glances, their earlier laughter now a distant memory. Jessica wiped at her eyes with a napkin, and Amanda bit her lip, her face pale with guilt. As the applause died down, a woman at another table spoke up. "Excuse me, miss," she said, her voice warm and curious. "Where did you learn to do that?" Sarah turned, startled by the question. She hesitated for a moment before replying, "I volunteer with the Red Cross." "It's part of the training." A ripple of impressed murmurs swept through the room. "The Red Cross?" Amanda echoed, her voice tinged with awe. She looked at Sarah with wide eyes, the full weight of the revelation sinking in. As Sarah quietly returned to her duties, the atmosphere at Veronica's table grew heavier. The women sat in silence, each grappling with their own thoughts. Jessica broke the quiet first. "She volunteers? In her free time?" she said, her voice thick with emotion. "And we've been sitting here treating her like she's nothing." Amanda nodded, her face etched with guilt. "I can't believe we laughed at her. She's out there saving lives, and we—" She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Veronica, who had remained uncharacteristically quiet, finally spoke. Her voice was hoarse, but steady. "She didn't have to help me," she said softly, her gaze fixed on the tablecloth. "Not after the way we treated her." Emily, another woman in the group, looked down at her hands. "We owe her more than an apology," she said firmly. "We need to make this right." The women nodded in agreement, their earlier bravado replaced by a solemn determination. As the restaurant resumed its normal hum, the women at Veronica's table couldn't ignore the growing tension between their actions and what had just transpired. The weight of their behavior hung over them like a storm cloud. Finally, Jessica pushed her chair back and stood, the screech of the legs cutting through the subdued chatter around them. "I can't sit here any longer," she said, her voice trembling. She glanced at Veronica, whose pale face bore an expression of guilt and confusion. Without another word, Jessica walked toward Sarah, who was quietly refilling water glasses at a nearby table. "Sarah," Jessica began, her voice unsteady. Sarah turned to face her, her eyes calm but wary. Jessica hesitated, glancing back at the table where her friends were watching with wide eyes. Then, taking a deep breath, she continued, "I'm so sorry for everything. The way we treated you was inexcusable. Sarah blinked, surprised by the unexpected apology. Thank you, she said softly, unsure what else to say. Jessica's voice cracked as she added, You didn't deserve any of it. And even after everything, you saved Veronica's life. I don't know how to make up for what we've done, but I want to try. Jessica's words seemed to break the dam. Amanda was next to stand, followed by Emily and Melissa. One by one, they approached Sarah, their faces etched with regret. We were cruel, thoughtless, Amanda said, her hands clenched nervously. You've shown more strength and grace tonight than I think any of us have in our entire lives. Emily nodded, her eyes red-rimmed from tears. I'm sorry, too. We didn't see you for who you really are, and that's on us. Melissa, the quietest of the group, added, I just want to say thank you for saving Veronica and for showing us what real kindness looks like. Sarah listened quietly, her gaze shifting between the women. She could see the sincerity in their faces, the cracks in their carefully curated personas. Despite the sting of their earlier words, she felt a flicker of compassion for them. I appreciate your apologies, Sarah said, her voice steady but kind. It's not easy to admit when you've been wrong. That takes courage. While her friends apologized, Veronica remained seated, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Her chest felt heavy, her mind replaying the events of the evening over and over. Each cruel remark she had made echoed in her ears like a haunting refrain. Finally, she couldn't bear it any longer. Slowly, she rose from her chair and approached Sarah. When Sarah turned to look at her, Veronica struggled to meet her eyes. I don't even know where to start, she began, her voice barely above a whisper. Sarah waited patiently, giving Veronica the space to find her words. I was awful to you, Veronica admitted, tears brimming in her eyes. Cruel, petty, and arrogant. And yet, when I was in danger, you saved me without a second thought. Veronica's voice cracked, and she wiped at her cheeks with trembling hands. I don't deserve your kindness. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I need to ask for it anyway. Can you ever forgive me? For a moment, Sarah said nothing, her expression unreadable. Then she reached out and gently touched Veronica's arm. Of course I forgive you, Sarah said softly. What happened earlier doesn't matter now. What matters is what you choose to do going forward. Veronica's shoulders sagged with relief, and she let out a shaky breath. Thank you, she whispered, her voice breaking. Back at their table, the women huddled together, speaking in hushed tones. The mood had shifted dramatically. Gone was the laughter and bravado that had filled the space earlier. We need to do something, Jessica said firmly, glancing at Veronica. Something real, not just words. Veronica nodded, her expression resolute. Sarah mentioned she volunteers with the Red Cross, she said, her voice gaining strength. Maybe we can support her work somehow. Amanda brightened at the suggestion. Yes, we could donate, organize a fundraiser, or even volunteer ourselves. Emily hesitated. Volunteer? She asked, her tone tinged with uncertainty. Jessica placed a hand on Emily's arm. It's time we step out of our comfort zones, she said gently. We've been so focused on ourselves for so long. Maybe this is the change we need. The group exchanged determined glances, their earlier sense of entitlement replaced by a budding desire to make amends, not just to Sarah, but to the world they had ignored for so long. As the night wound down, the women approached Sarah once more. This time, their faces were earnest, their demeanor humble. Sarah, Veronica began, we've been talking and we want to help. Not just with an apology, but with action. How can we support you and the causes you care about? Sarah looked at them, her expression softening. That's incredibly kind of you, she said, her voice filled with surprise. The Red Cross could always use support. whether it's donations, fundraising, or volunteering. Emily stepped forward, her voice stronger now. Then that's what we'll do. Whatever you need, we'll help make it happen. Sarah smiled, the warmth in her expression lighting up the space between them. For the first time that evening, the tension lifted, replaced by a sense of hope and possibility. The days that followed marked a transformation for Veronica and her friends. They threw themselves into their newfound mission with a determination that surprised even themselves. Gone were the days of idle gossip and indulgent shopping sprees. Their conversations now revolved around planning charity events, volunteering schedules, and ways to make a meaningful impact. Veronica reached out to Sarah to learn more about her work with the Red Cross. Together, they sat in a quiet cafe as Sarah shared stories of disaster relief efforts, community outreach programs, and the lives that had been touched by acts of kindness. "I had no idea the scope of what you do," Veronica admitted, her voice tinged with admiration. "It's incredible, Sarah, and humbling." Sarah smiled, her hands wrapped around her coffee cup. "It's not about doing something grand. It's about showing up, offering what you can, and being there for others when they need it most." Veronica nodded thoughtfully, the words resonating deeply. "I want to show up too," she said firmly. "Not just with money, but with my time and effort. Will you help me figure out where to start?" Sarah agreed, and their collaboration began. The first step was organizing a fundraiser for the Red Cross. Veronica and her friends pooled their resources, reaching out to their extensive networks to plan an event that would not only raise money, but also awareness about the importance of community support. The women met regularly at Veronica's home, transforming her sprawling living room into a bustling headquarters. Emily, with her keen eye for design, sketched out elegant decor plans that incorporated elements symbolizing the Red Cross's mission. "I'm thinking soft red lighting and white floral arrangements," Emily explained during one meeting. "Subtle but meaningful." Amanda took charge of the auction items, securing donations from local businesses and artists. "We've got luxury vacations, one-of-a-kind art pieces, and even a cooking class with a celebrity chef," she announced proudly. Jessica, with her extensive social network, worked tirelessly on the guest list. "We need to bring in people who can make a real difference," she said. "The kind who don't just write checks but inspire others to get involved." Meanwhile, Sarah worked alongside them, providing guidance and sharing stories from her experiences. Her humility and passion served as a grounding force, reminding everyone why they were doing this in the first place. The night of the fundraiser arrived, and the venue, a historic mansion loaned by one of Veronica's wealthy connections, was a vision of understated elegance. Soft music played in the background as guests in formal attire mingled, sipping champagne and admiring the auction displays. Veronica and her friends greeted attendees with genuine warmth, their once superficial personas replaced by a newfound authenticity. "Thank you so much for coming," Veronica said to a couple as they arrived. "Your support means the world to us, and to the people this fundraiser will help." As the evening progressed, Sarah found herself at the center of attention. Guests were eager to meet the woman whose story had inspired such a remarkable transformation in Veronica and her friends. "You've created something extraordinary here," a guest said to Sarah, his voice filled with admiration. "It's rare to see this kind of passion and sincerity." "It's not just me," Sarah replied, glancing toward Veronica and the others. "This is a group effort, and it shows what's possible when people come together for a common purpose." Toward the end of the evening, Veronica stepped up to the podium, her heart pounding as she faced the room. The spotlight felt different now. Not a stage for her own vanity, but a platform to amplify a cause greater than herself. "Good evening, everyone," she began, her voice steady despite the nerves fluttering in her chest. "I want to start by thanking you all for being here tonight. Your presence and support mean more than I can express." She paused, her gaze sweeping over the crowd. "A few weeks ago, I was a different person. I lived in a bubble of privilege, unaware of the struggles and strength of those around me. That bubble burst the night Sarah saved my life." Veronica's voice faltered for a moment, but she pressed on. "She didn't just save me physically. She opened my eyes to the kind of person I want to be. Her courage, compassion, and selflessness have inspired not just me, but all of us." The room fell silent, hanging on her every word. "This fundraiser is just the beginning," Veronica continued. "It's our way of giving back, of showing that we can learn, grow, and contribute to something bigger than ourselves. Thank you for being part of that journey." The applause was thunderous as Veronica stepped down, her cheeks flushed but her heart full. The fundraiser exceeded all expectations, raising a significant amount for the Red Cross and inspiring many attendees to get involved. Veronica and her friends felt a deep sense of fulfillment as they watched the evening's success unfold. In the weeks that followed, the ripple effect of Sarah's influence continued to spread. More and more people in their social circle began volunteering, donating, and participating in community initiatives. For Veronica and her friends, this was only the beginning. They threw themselves into their volunteer work with passion, finding joy in every small act of kindness. And for Sarah, the transformation she witnessed was a reminder of the power of compassion, the way it could change not only individuals but entire communities. As the weeks turned into months, the bond between Sarah, Veronica, and her friends deepened. Their once superficial interactions had evolved into meaningful friendships built on trust, respect, and shared purpose. Sarah continued her work at the restaurant, though the atmosphere had shifted dramatically. Patrons who once looked past her now greeted her warmly, often stopping to ask about her volunteer work. Her colleagues treated her with admiration, recognizing her quiet strength and unwavering dedication. Veronica and her friends joined Sarah in her volunteer efforts. At first, they struggled to adjust, swapping designer shoes for sneakers and fancy luncheons for soup kitchen shifts. But Sarah guided them with patience and encouragement. One chilly Saturday morning, the group gathered at a community shelter to help distribute food to families in need. The air was filled with the scent of warm bread and hearty stew as volunteers bustled about, preparing meals and setting up tables. Emily, who had once been uncomfortable with anything that disrupted her manicured routine, found herself laughing as she ladled soup into bowls. "I never thought I'd enjoy this so much," she admitted to Sarah, her cheeks flushed from the effort. "It's because you're making a difference," Sarah replied with a smile. "There's nothing quite like it." Across the room, Veronica knelt beside a little boy clutching a toy car. His eyes lit up as she handed him a plate of food. "There you go, buddy," she said softly. "Enjoy." The boy's shy smile warmed Veronica's heart, and she realized how much her life had changed. The hollow pursuits of wealth and status now seemed trivial compared to moments like this. Word of the group's volunteer work spread through their social circles, sparking curiosity and eventually admiration. Friends and acquaintances who once prided themselves on luxury began to follow Veronica's example. At a high society luncheon, Elizabeth, a prominent socialite, approached Veronica with a curious expression. "I hear you've been spending your weekends at shelters and food drives," she said. Veronica nodded, her tone confident yet humble. "Yes, and it's been one of the most rewarding experiences of my life. You should join us sometime." Elizabeth hesitated, then smiled. "I just might. It sounds meaningful." Over time, more people joined the group's efforts, creating a ripple effect of compassion and community involvement. Inspired by their experiences, the group decided to launch a new initiative, a mentorship program for young women from underserved communities. The program aimed to provide guidance, resources, and opportunities for personal and professional growth. Sarah played a central role, drawing on her experiences as a Red Cross volunteer to shape the program's structure. Veronica and her friends used their connections to secure funding, recruit mentors, and organize workshops. One of the first events was a career day held at a local community center. Women from various professions shared their stories, offering advice and encouragement to the attendees. During the event, Sarah stood before a room full of young women, her voice steady and sincere. "Your path may not always be easy," she said, "but you have the strength to overcome any obstacle. Never let anyone make you feel less than you are." The applause that followed was heartfelt and thunderous. The mentorship program flourished, touching the lives of countless young women and uniting the community in a shared mission. Veronica and her friends became fixtures at the events, their dedication shining through in every interaction. At one event, a young woman approached Veronica, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you for this program," she said. "It's given me hope for a better future." Veronica smiled, her voice warm. "You've had that strength all along. We're just here to help you see it." One evening, as the group gathered at Sarah's modest apartment to plan their next initiative, Veronica took a moment to reflect. "I never imagined my life would take this path," she admitted, her voice tinged with emotion. "But I've never felt more fulfilled." Sarah placed a hand on Veronica's shoulder. "You've found your purpose," she said, "and you're making a real difference." The room was filled with a sense of accomplishment and hope. Together, they had not only transformed their own lives, but had also created a ripple effect that was changing their community for the better. To celebrate their accomplishments, the group organized a community event, a day of food, music, and activities for families in the area. Held in a local park, the event brought together people from all walks of life. Sarah watched with pride as children played games, families enjoyed meals, and neighbors connected. The sense of unity and joy was palpable. Veronica approached Sarah, a wide smile on her face. "Look at this," she said, gesturing to the lively scene around them. "None of this would have happened without you." Sarah shook her head. "It's not just me. This is all of us, together." As the sun set over the park, casting a warm glow over the celebration, Sarah and her friends stood together, their hearts full. They knew their work was far from over, but they were ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The journey had changed them all in ways they could never have imagined. From a night of cruelty and humiliation had come a story of redemption, compassion, and hope, a testament to the power of kindness to transform lives and communities. As the weeks turned into months, the group's efforts expanded far beyond their original initiatives. Inspired by the success of their mentorship program and fundraisers, Sarah brought up a new idea during one of their planning sessions: creating a community garden. Sitting around Veronica's spacious living room with notebooks and coffee mugs scattered on the table, Sarah explained her vision with her usual quiet passion. "It's not just about planting vegetables," she said, her voice calm but full of conviction. "It's about creating a space where people can connect, learn, and grow together. A garden can nourish both the body and the soul." Veronica leaned forward, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "I love it. Let's do it. We'll find the land, rally volunteers, and even partner with local schools for educational programs. This can be something truly special." The group dove into the project with characteristic enthusiasm. Within days, Veronica used her connections to secure an overgrown plot of land near a neighborhood center, while Emily reached out to a landscaping company for advice on how to bring the garden to life. Sarah organized meetings with local schools, hoping to involve children in the project and teach them about sustainability and the joy of nurturing life. On the first morning of work at the garden, the group arrived in work clothes armed with shovels, gloves, and packets of seeds. As they stared at the overgrown weeds and litter-strewn lot, there was a moment of silence. Then Amanda broke it with a laugh. "Well, it's not exactly glamorous, but I think we've faced worse." Sarah chuckled, patting Amanda on the shoulder. "It's going to be beautiful. We'll make it happen, one step at a time." The group spent hours clearing the space, pulling weeds, and turning the soil. They were soon joined by neighborhood residents who had heard about the project. Some came to lend a hand, while others brought water and snacks for the volunteers. By midday, the once-abandoned lot was already beginning to transform. Veronica knelt beside a young boy who shyly handed her a packet of sunflower seeds. "I want to plant these," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "My mom said they grow tall and strong, like me." Veronica smiled, her heart warming at his words. "Let's find the perfect spot for them," she said, taking his hand and leading him to a sunny patch of soil. As the garden began to take shape over the following weeks, it became a beacon of hope and renewal for the entire community. Families gathered to plant vegetables and flowers, sharing tips and stories as they worked side by side. Children squealed with delight as they watered their seedlings and watched them sprout into tiny plants. Elderly residents, some of whom had once been skeptical of the project, brought chairs and sat under the shade of trees, offering advice from their years of gardening experience. On a sunny Saturday morning, Sarah and Veronica worked together to build a small bench near the center of the garden. They secured the final plank with satisfied smiles before stepping back to admire their work. "This place is incredible," Veronica said, wiping her brow and looking around at the vibrant rows of plants and the people bustling about with wheelbarrows and watering cans. "I can't believe how far we've come." Sarah nodded, her gaze soft. "It's not just a garden, it's a community. Look at how people are connecting, helping each other, and finding joy in the simple things." Later that day, the group gathered to discuss the next steps for the garden. Emily suggested hosting workshops on cooking with fresh produce, while Amanda proposed creating a donation system to distribute extra vegetables to families in need. The ideas flowed freely, each one building on the last as their excitement grew. As the sun set and painted the garden in warm hues of orange and pink, Sarah stood quietly, watching the scene before her. Families laughed and chatted as they watered their plants. A group of children ran around, their faces smeared with dirt but glowing with happiness. Veronica approached Sarah, handing her a cup of lemonade. "I was just thinking," Veronica began, her tone thoughtful, "about how much has changed since that night at the restaurant. I never imagined my life would look like this, but I wouldn't trade it for anything." Sarah smiled, touched by Veronica's sincerity. "You've come so far, Veronica. You and everyone else. It's amazing to see what happens when people come together for something good." The garden became a cherished part of the community, but it was only one of many projects the group tackled. They continued to expand their efforts, always looking for new ways to make a difference. Sarah, ever humble, often deflected praise, insisting that the true credit belonged to everyone who had joined them on their journey. Veronica, however, never hesitated to remind people of the pivotal role Sarah had played. "She's the heart of all this," Veronica would say whenever the subject came up. Her kindness changed everything. The ripple effect of their work spread far and wide. More people were inspired to volunteer, donate, and create their own community initiatives. Schools started incorporating lessons on kindness and community service into their curriculums. Local businesses began supporting charitable events and offering discounts to those who contributed to the community. The transformation was nothing short of extraordinary. One evening, as Sarah and Veronica sat on the bench they had built in the garden, they watched the stars appear in the night sky. "Do you ever think about how it all started?" Veronica asked, her voice soft. "That night feels like a lifetime ago." Sarah nodded, her expression thoughtful. "It was a turning point for all of us. But it's what came after that truly matters. We chose to grow from it, to build something better." Veronica smiled, her heart full. "Thank you, Sarah, for everything. You've taught me so much about what really matters in life." Sarah placed a hand on Veronica's shoulder, her voice filled with warmth. "And you've shown me the power of redemption and change. We've learned from each other." Their conversation drifted into comfortable silence, the sounds of the garden, crickets chirping, leaves rustling in the breeze, filling the air around them. It was a moment of quiet reflection, a testament to the journey they had taken together. As time passed, the garden flourished, much like the community it served. It stood as a symbol of resilience, compassion, and the profound impact of one small act of kindness. The story of Sarah, Veronica, and their friends continued to inspire, reminding everyone who heard it of the transformative power of empathy and the importance of building a better world, together. Months later, the garden had become a cornerstone of the community. What started as a simple project had grown into something far larger than anyone could have anticipated, Rows of vegetables thrived under the care of volunteers, while colorful flowers lined the pathways, attracting butterflies and bees. Families gathered on weekends for workshops, and schoolchildren visited regularly for lessons on nature and sustainability. One particular afternoon, the group hosted a harvest festival to celebrate the garden's success. The event was bustling with activity. Children painted signs, local musicians played cheerful tunes, and tables were laden with freshly harvested produce and homemade baked goods. Veronica, dressed casually in jeans and a t-shirt, helped set up a booth where visitors could learn about composting. Her transformation from the cold and judgmental woman she once was to a kind and engaged leader was evident in every interaction. Sarah stood nearby, observing the lively scene with a heart full of pride. A young girl approached her, holding a small basket of cherry tomatoes. "Miss Sarah," the girl said shyly, "I picked these. Can I give them to someone who needs food?" Kneeling to meet the child's gaze, Sarah smiled warmly. "That's a wonderful idea. You're helping more than you know." She led the girl to a table where donations were being collected for a local food bank. Meanwhile, Emily organized a cooking demonstration, teaching attendees how to prepare simple, nutritious meals with ingredients from the garden. She had discovered a hidden talent for teaching and took great joy in sharing her knowledge. "Food is love," she said to her audience, "and this garden has brought so much love to all of us." Amanda, who had previously been known for her sharp wit and penchant for luxury, was now one of the garden's most dedicated caretakers. She guided newcomers through planting techniques and eagerly shared the story of how the project came to be. "It all started with Sarah," Amanda explained to a group of curious onlookers. "Her kindness turned our lives around, and this garden is just one of the ways we're trying to pay it forward." The festival continued into the evening, with a community potluck dinner under strings of twinkling lights. Veronica stood to make a toast, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "This garden is more than just a place to grow food," she said, raising her glass. "It's a symbol of what we can achieve when we come together. None of this would exist without Sarah, who taught us the true meaning of compassion and strength. Let's continue to build on this foundation and make our community even stronger." The crowd erupted in applause, and all eyes turned to Sarah, who blushed under the attention. "Thank you," she said simply, her voice filled with gratitude. "But this is a team effort. Each of you has brought something special to this garden and to our community. Together we've created something beautiful." After the festival, Veronica and Sarah lingered in the garden, walking along the now familiar paths under the light of the moon. Veronica paused near the sunflowers that had grown tall and proud, their golden faces turned toward the sky. "I feel like these sunflowers," Veronica said, her voice reflective. "I used to live in the shadows, but now I feel like I've found the light." Sarah smiled, her heart swelling with affection for her friend. "You've done the work, Veronica. You've grown into the person you were always meant to be." The two women stood in companionable silence, their bond stronger than ever. They knew there was still much work to be done, but the progress they had made filled them with hope for the future. As the garden continued to flourish, so did the lives of everyone involved. Veronica and her friends remained deeply committed to their mission, constantly seeking new ways to give back and create positive change. Sarah, though still humble and grounded, became a beacon of inspiration for all who knew her. The story of the garden and its impact spread far beyond their community, drawing attention from nearby towns and even inspiring similar projects in other areas. Sarah often received letters from people who had heard her story and wanted to start their own initiatives. She always responded with encouragement, reminding them that small acts of kindness could grow into something extraordinary. Years later, the garden remained a vibrant part of the community. Its paths were well-trodden, its benches well-loved, and its crops as abundant as ever. The friendships forged there continued to thrive, and the lessons learned within its borders carried on through generations. Sarah and Veronica often visited the garden together, their connection as strong as the roots of the sunflowers that still stood tall and proud. They knew that their journey had been one of growth, transformation, and enduring hope, a testament to the power of kindness and the infinite possibilities it could create. And as they looked out over the flourishing garden, they knew that their story, like the seeds they had planted, would continue to grow and inspire for years to come. As time passed, the garden became more than just a community project. It was a living symbol of hope and transformation. People from all walks of life came to visit, inspired by its story and eager to contribute in their own ways. It was no longer unusual to see entire families working side by side in the soil, or school groups visiting to learn about sustainability and cooperation. One particularly memorable day, a reporter from a regional news outlet arrived to interview Sarah and Veronica. The story of the garden and the remarkable change it had sparked in its creators had begun to draw attention from beyond the local area. Sarah was reluctant at first, not comfortable with being in the spotlight. "The garden speaks for itself," she said to Veronica as they prepared to meet the journalist. "Yes, but people need to know what's possible," Veronica replied gently. "Your story shows that kindness and perseverance can truly change lives. Don't underestimate how inspiring that is." The interview took place on a sunny morning with the garden in full bloom. The reporter, a young woman with a warm demeanor, asked thoughtful questions about how the project began and the challenges they had overcome. "It wasn't always easy," Veronica admitted, glancing at Sarah with a smile. "But Sarah taught us that even the smallest seeds of kindness can grow into something extraordinary if we nurture them." Sarah blushed, then added, "The garden is a reflection of what a community can achieve when we work together. It's not about one person. It's about everyone." The article that followed captured the essence of their journey, from the transformative power of Sarah's kindness to the deep bonds that had formed among the volunteers. When it was published, it resonated deeply with readers, sparking a wave of support and interest in similar projects. Donations began pouring in, not just for the garden, but for other community initiatives as well. Sarah and Veronica were inundated with invitations to speak at events and share their story. While Sarah remained modest about her role, Veronica stepped into the spotlight with newfound confidence, using her platform to advocate for compassion and community building. One evening, as they sat together in Veronica's living room, reviewing their latest plans for expanding the garden's educational programs, Veronica turned to Sarah with a thoughtful expression. "You know," she began, "this garden isn't just a place anymore. It's a movement, and it's all because of you." Sarah shook her head, smiling. "It's because of all of us. I may have planted the first seed, but you and everyone else have helped it grow." Veronica leaned back in her chair, her eyes twinkling. "Then let's keep planting, Sarah. Who knows how far we can go?" And plant they did. Over the next few years, the garden became the heart of a network of community projects, each one aimed at bringing people together and fostering a spirit of collaboration. They established a scholarship fund for local students, built a shelter for families in need, and even started a mentorship program for aspiring leaders. Through it all, Sarah remained a quiet but steadfast presence, always encouraging others and reminding them of the power of small acts of kindness. Veronica, now a confident and compassionate leader, often reflected on how far they had come. "It's amazing, isn't it?" Veronica said one afternoon as they walked through the garden, now bustling with activity. "All of this started because of one moment, one choice to be kind." Sarah smiled, watching a group of children laughing as they watered their plants. "Kindness has a way of growing," she replied. "And when it takes root, it changes everything." Their journey was far from over, but as they stood together in the garden that had become a beacon of hope, they knew they were ready for whatever lay ahead. The seeds they had planted would continue to grow, touching lives and inspiring others to create their own stories of transformation and connection. And in that moment, surrounded by the beauty they had nurtured, Sarah and Veronica felt a profound sense of gratitude for the garden, for their community, and for each other. As the garden's influence spread, so did its story. People from nearby cities and even other states visited to see the thriving community project that had grown from a simple act of kindness. Sarah, Veronica, and their friends found themselves fielding requests for advice and guidance on starting similar initiatives. They decided to create a resource guide, a booklet filled with practical tips, inspirational stories, and lessons they had learned along the way. The guide, titled From the Ground Up, Growing Kindness and Community, became an instant success. It was filled with photos of the garden, quotes from volunteers, and step-by-step instructions on organizing community projects. They distributed it widely, offering it for free to schools, libraries, and community centers. One afternoon, while reviewing the final draft of the guide, Sarah looked up at Veronica. "I never imagined this would happen," she said, her voice filled with wonder. "It started with just a few plants, and now, this." Veronica nodded, a soft smile on her lips. "You know what they say. Small seeds grow into mighty trees, and we've only just begun." The garden team's efforts expanded into new areas. They partnered with local farmers to establish a farmers market, where fresh produce was sold at affordable prices, ensuring that healthy food was accessible to everyone. They also launched an annual Kindness Week, encouraging acts of generosity throughout the community, from donating to shelters to writing thank you notes for essential workers. During one Kindness Week event, Veronica stood at the front of a packed auditorium, addressing a group of high school students. She shared her personal story of transformation, openly discussing her past mistakes and the lessons she had learned. "I used to think that status and material wealth were everything," Veronica admitted. "But the truth is, none of that brought me happiness. It wasn't until I met Sarah and experienced the power of giving back that I realized what truly matters. You don't need a lot to make a difference. Sometimes, all it takes is one kind word, one small gesture, to change someone's life." The students were captivated, and when Veronica finished speaking, they erupted into applause. Afterward, many of them approached her and Sarah to ask how they could get involved. Back at the garden, the days were as lively as ever. Volunteers worked side by side, their hands busy planting, weeding, and harvesting. Laughter and conversation filled the air, creating a sense of unity that was impossible to ignore. One day, as Sarah helped a young boy plant sunflower seeds, she noticed a familiar face walking through the garden gate. It was Maria, the line cook who had once offered Sarah words of encouragement during one of her darkest moments at the restaurant. "Maria!" Sarah exclaimed, her face lighting up with joy. Maria smiled warmly, holding out a plate covered in foil. "I heard about everything you've done here, and I had to see it for myself," she said. "And I couldn't come empty-handed, so I brought my famous empanadas." The two women embraced, and Sarah introduced Maria to the other volunteers. Soon, everyone was gathered around, enjoying Maria's delicious empanadas and listening as she shared stories from the restaurant. "You always had a kind heart, Sarah," Maria said, her voice full of pride. "I'm not surprised you've inspired so many people. You've always been a light in the darkness." As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the garden, Sarah stood with Veronica and Maria, looking out at the scene before them. Volunteers were packing up for the day, their faces tired but happy, while children chased each other through the rows of sunflowers. "This is what it's all about," Sarah said softly. "Bringing people together, creating something beautiful, and sharing it with others." Veronica nodded, her eyes shimmering with emotion. "And it all started with you, Sarah. You reminded us of what truly matters, and we'll never forget that." As they stood there, surrounded by the fruits of their labor and the warmth of their community, Sarah felt a profound sense of peace. The garden had grown beyond her wildest dreams, and so had the connections it had fostered. And she knew, deep in her heart, that the ripples of kindness they had created would continue to spread, touching lives in ways they could only begin to imagine. Months turned into years, and the garden continued to flourish, becoming a central hub for the community. New projects branched out from it, including workshops for teaching practical skills like cooking, carpentry, and financial literacy. These workshops were designed to empower people, giving them tools to improve their lives and the confidence to pass those lessons on to others. One of the most impactful additions was the mentorship program for at-risk youth. Sarah took a lead role in this initiative, dedicating her time to listening, guiding, and encouraging young people who faced challenges similar to those she had once endured. During one session, a teenage girl named Olivia, who had been struggling with self-esteem and feeling out of place at school, approached Sarah. "I don't know how you do it," Olivia said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You've been through so much, but you always seem so strong." Sarah knelt down to meet Olivia's eyes. "I wasn't always strong," she said gently. "There were times when I felt lost and overwhelmed. But I realized that strength isn't about never struggling. It's about choosing to keep going even when things are hard. And the more we reach out to others, the more strength we find within ourselves." Olivia nodded, her eyes glistening with tears. From that moment on, she became one of the garden's most dedicated volunteers, eventually leading her own youth workshops and inspiring others with her story. The ripple effect of kindness extended far beyond the community, reaching places Sarah and her team never expected. Letters began to arrive from people across the country, sharing how they had been inspired to start their own projects after hearing about the garden. One letter, from a woman named Clara in Nebraska, read, "I was at a very low point in my life when I came across your story. It gave me hope and reminded me of the power of kindness. I've started a small garden in my neighborhood, and it's already bringing people together in ways I never imagined. Thank you for showing me that change is possible." Each letter was a reminder of the profound impact their work was having, and it fueled their determination to keep going. As the garden grew, so did the bonds between Sarah, Veronica, and the rest of their team. They became a family in every sense of the word, celebrating each other's successes and supporting each other through challenges. One particularly emotional milestone came when Veronica was invited to give a TED Talk about the garden and her journey of transformation. Standing on the stage, she felt a surge of nerves but also an overwhelming sense of purpose. "I used to live a life that revolved around me, my image, my comfort, my desires," Veronica began, her voice steady. "But then I met Sarah, and she showed me that life is so much bigger than that. She taught me that the greatest joy comes from serving others and building something greater than yourself." Veronica shared the story of the garden, from its humble beginnings to the vibrant community it had become. She spoke of the lessons she had learned about forgiveness, humility, and the resilience of the human spirit. When she finished, the audience gave her a standing ovation, and Sarah, watching from the front row, felt tears streaming down her face. Afterward, Veronica found Sarah backstage and embraced her tightly. "This is as much your story as it is mine," Veronica said. "You've changed my life in ways I can never fully express." As they stood there, the magnitude of what they had accomplished together became clear. It wasn't just about the garden or the programs they had started. It was about the lives they had touched and the hope they had ignited in so many others. Back in their community, the work continued. New volunteers joined every week, bringing fresh ideas and perspectives. The garden became a place where everyone, regardless of their background or circumstances, could find acceptance, purpose, and connection. On a quiet evening, long after the day's work had ended, Sarah and Veronica sat together on a bench overlooking the garden. The moon cast a soft glow over the rows of flowers and vegetables, and the air was filled with the scent of blooming jasmine. "Can you believe how far we've come?" Veronica asked, her voice filled with awe. Sarah smiled, her heart swelling with gratitude. "It's incredible. And the best part is, we're not done yet." Veronica nodded, her eyes shining with determination. "Not even close." As they sat there, surrounded by the beauty they had helped create, they felt a profound sense of peace and purpose. They knew that the seeds they had planted, both in the soil and in the hearts of those they had touched, would continue to grow, spreading kindness and hope far and wide. And in that quiet moment, they made a silent promise to keep nurturing those seeds, knowing that the world could always use a little more love. As the years passed, the garden and its ripple effects became an enduring legacy for Sarah, Veronica, and their ever-growing network of volunteers. The space itself evolved into more than just a garden. It became a sanctuary, a place where people found healing, growth, and belonging. A new project emerged, inspired by the garden's success. A community learning center built right next to the garden. The center offered free classes in areas ranging from sustainable farming to conflict resolution, from creative writing to basic computer skills. Its motto, engraved above the entrance, read, "Growing together, learning together." The Community Learning Center quickly became a bustling hub of activity. Teachers and students from diverse backgrounds came together to share knowledge and ideas, bridging gaps and forging connections that transcended age, culture, and social class. One of the center's standout programs was its mentorship initiative for young adults. Sarah and Veronica took an active role in it, pairing mentors with mentees based on shared interests and goals. The program's first graduate, a young man named Daniel, went on to start his own nonprofit focused on providing clean water to underserved areas. At a celebration event for the program, Daniel stood on stage with tears in his eyes. "This garden and this community didn't just change my life. They saved it," he said. "You believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself. And now, I want to pass that forward." The applause that followed was deafening, and Sarah couldn't help but feel overwhelmed with pride. She exchanged a tearful smile with Veronica, who mouthed, "This is why we do it." As the garden's reputation grew, it attracted attention from larger organizations and philanthropists. Donations poured in, enabling the team to expand their outreach efforts. They opened satellite gardens in neighboring towns, each one designed with the same principles of kindness, inclusivity, and community empowerment. Despite the growth, Sarah remained deeply involved in the hands-on work. She could often be found digging in the dirt alongside new volunteers or leading tours for school children. For her, the garden was still about the small, meaningful moments, the look of wonder on a child's face as they pulled their first carrot from the ground, or the smile of an elderly volunteer who found purpose in tending to the flowers. Veronica, too, remained committed to the cause. She had long since abandoned her previous lifestyle of indulgence and superficial pursuits, instead dedicating herself to advocacy and philanthropy. She became a sought-after speaker, sharing the story of her transformation and inspiring others to rethink their priorities. But amidst all the success, the core of the garden's mission never wavered. It wasn't about fame or accolades. It was about creating a space where people could come together to grow, learn, and support one another. One memorable day, Sarah received a visit from a journalist who had heard about the garden and wanted to feature it in a national magazine. As they walked through the rows of vegetables and flowers, Sarah spoke about the garden's humble beginnings. "It all started with a single act of kindness," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "And that kindness grew into something none of us could have imagined. But what's most important is that it continues to grow, because kindness doesn't have an end point. It's something we keep planting, over and over again." The journalist was moved by Sarah's words and asked her what she hoped the garden's legacy would be. Sarah paused, looking out at the volunteers working together in the sunshine. "I hope it reminds people that no matter how small an act of kindness may seem, it can have a ripple effect beyond anything you could ever predict," she said. "We all have the power to make a difference, one seed at a time." That evening, after the journalist had left, Sarah and Veronica sat together in the garden, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The air was filled with the gentle hum of crickets, and the scent of lavender wafted through the air. "Do you ever think about what might have happened if we hadn't met that night?" Veronica asked softly. Sarah smiled, her eyes glistening with tears. "I think about it all the time, and I'm grateful every day that we did. That night changed everything, for both of us." Veronica reached out and took Sarah's hand, squeezing it gently. "You've taught me so much, Sarah, about forgiveness, about resilience, about what it means to truly live. I'll never stop being thankful for you." "And I'll never stop being thankful for you," Sarah replied. As they sat there, surrounded by the beauty they had helped create, they knew that their journey was far from over. The garden would continue to grow, just as they would. And as the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, they made a silent promise to keep nurturing the seeds of kindness, knowing that the world was a better place because of it. The garden wasn't just a place. It was a movement, a testament to the transformative power of compassion and community. And its story was far from finished.